views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening, welcome to BronxTalk. Tonight we delve into the Southwest Bronx, specifically the 16th City Council District, which includes the Bronx communities of Claremont, Concourse, Concourse Village, Highbridge, Morris Heights, Mount Eden, and Morrisania. We have a number of issues on our plate tonight, including an update on the Jerome Avenue rezoning and the plans to replace the Rikers Jails. We'll talk about NYCHA, participatory budgeting, a new school, other new local programs, and much, much more. Please join me in welcoming back to BronxTalk from the aforementioned 16th Council District, Councilmember Vanessa Gibson.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Nice to have you with us. We have so many things, and the folks don't know, but when you and I were talking about what we ought to talk about, the list got long and longer and longer, so I'm going right to it. Jerome Avenue rezoning. As you know, it was controversial. You were here right after it was passed. Let's get an update. I know I read one article that was unfortunate, that it seemed like there was an auto body shop that was displaced. So let's start there. Are we still concerned about displacement? Where are we at?
Yes, we're always still concerned about displacement for the auto businesses along Jerome Avenue. There is a commitment and there is money in a fund, $1.5 million, that will provide relocation cost for eligible businesses. We're working with the New York City Law Department, the Deputy Mayor's Office on the language, and we expect to have final details probably early 2019 that we will be able to roll out and work with a lot of the small businesses and organizations like WAMA. People like Pedro Estevez, who've been incredible in terms of support and knowing the businesses.
We should mention he's with the auto
WAMA.
Insurance. Oh, is that what it is, WAMA?
Yes.
You know, the auto, or do you know what it is?
United Auto Merchants Association.
There you go. I mean, I know who he is and I know what he does. I didn't realize that was the name of the organization.
And we're also looking at legislation. So we've introduced legislation that provides some sort of relief for commercial tenants. Many of the tenants along Jerome Avenue are leasing. They have short-term leases, less than 5 years. Some of them are month-to-month, year-to-year. And we want greater protections just as we provide those opportunities for tenants in residential.
$1.5 million with all those businesses doesn't go that far. I mean, let's face it, somebody's got a business and you give them $10,000 or $20,000, he's not really able to relocate his business.
Right.
So
it's a start. It was something that we were able to negotiate successfully in the terms and conditions of the final agreement. Each business will be eligible for up to $20,000, and we know that's not enough, but it is a start. We're also looking at other opportunities in the industrial business zone. We cover Bathgate Avenue, which is very industrial, so we're looking at opportunities there. Some of the businesses that have been relocated on Jerome Avenue, it is making way for housing. And not that I want to push businesses out in replacement for housing, but I do recognize it is about balance. It is about protecting mom and pop stores and businesses, but it's also about making sure that we change the layout and the makeup of Jerome Avenue and provide for mixed use opportunity.
Which was the original objective to begin with. I've seen notes coming from, let's say, The Real Deal or some of the other real estate papers that so-and-so has bought a building and it appears to change the nature of the community. Will some of the housing, a lot of the housing, be available to people who really could use new housing in that community?
Yes. So one thing I want residents in the district to understand is because of the rezoning, because of MIH and ZQA, we have protections in place. So any new developer that purchases a parcel of land in our district in the rezoning area has to build with government subsidies. No one can build today and build market rate housing along Jerome Avenue. It won't work. They will not be successful. The market is not there. So the zoning will propel affordable housing. And as we meet with developers on potential opportunities, we are ensuring that we get set-asides for formerly homeless families, housing for veterans and seniors and families coming from shelters, low income, low AMIs like 30% and 40%. We also know it's about mixed income as well and diversity. So we also want to take care of college graduates that are coming home, our nurses and medical professionals from Bronx Care, our teachers that live in the community. We also want to make sure that as we're raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, 2 parents making $15 an hour are above 30% AMI. So we also want to make sure that we are catering to working class families.
Are some of the negotiations with developers or others who are building housing difficult negotiations? In other words, you've got to draw the line and say, you know what, we're not doing this. Or do you find that the climate is people are affable, I guess is the word.
I think I've seen a combination of both. Depending on who the developer is, if they are community oriented, they have a track record, they have a portfolio of already building in New York City, building in the Bronx, having housing in low income communities of color, then you're more, successful because they understand that there is an urgent need for income level housing and housing for those at the lowest end of the spectrum. I think when you get new developers that are very new to New York City, they're new to the Bronx, they really don't have an idea of what type of housing we need. And so you have to get them to a place where they can understand that it is a mutual relationship. Just as they want to benefit, we want to benefit too. And we want to make sure the housing is available for the residents of today as well as the residents of tomorrow.
In terms of residents being displaced, I mean, maybe there's a natural selection. People who are watching now saying, okay, I live in that area, I got to get out of this building. I'd love new housing in the Bronx would be wonderful, keeping myself in the community.
Right.
What is the process going to be? So, and I'd like to think, and I know that people in the Bronx would like to think, that people who live in that community will get first dibs on what could be available.
So right now with all housing that is government subsidized that goes through HPD's lottery system, there is a 50% set aside for community residents. There is a community preference for residents of the local community board. So in our area, this is Community Board 4. So any development project that we build 100, 200 units, it's automatically 50% for the local community. There's a set aside for individuals with disabilities, and that's a citywide thing, as well as municipal workers, city workers, but also during the negotiations before you get to the groundbreaking, when you're dealing with the contract negotiations that the developer will have with the city and working with the city council, because a lot of these efforts, there will be an Article 11 that has to be passed by the local council member. So we are able to stimulate some local hiring provisions, set-asides that are higher than the minimum. So depending on the project and the type of subsidy, if it's an ELA or a SARA type of program through HPD, there are automatic set-asides guaranteed. But we don't want the minimum. Sometimes we want to go above that. So some of the programs, it's a 10%, it's a 15% minimum set-aside. So we've been able to successfully negotiate with landlords and owners and get more than that 10 to 15% minimum.
You sound incredibly confident. You sound hopeful. I mean, the skepticism has certainly been out there. Is there anything out there that you say, boy, I'm not sure we've got this nailed down, or this is a concern, or this has to happen in order for this to work?
Right, so
I'm curious as to what's really in there, what's on your mind about this. We got to make this happen.
Right. Well, generally, I remain concerned with a lot of the housing that is being, erected in areas outside of the rezoning because they're not necessarily protected.
So you can't control that or have the input.
I don't necessarily control that. Because
and
of
you're
the
saying
zoning.
that, excuse me, that maybe could affect, but depending on how that economy works, that may affect some of the people in the zone.
Because you can have developers that will look outside of the rezoning because they know within the zoning there are certain requirements that they have to follow. So that's a concern, and I am always, pushing the administration on supporting the small businesses and making sure that SBS, we have a mobile unit that comes out every month. We have new legislation that's been codified in law called Certificate of No Harassment, which relates to building owners making modifications to their buildings. And in order to do that, they have to demonstrate that they have not engaged in tenant harassment. And that's starting in Community Boards 4 and 5. The right to counsel work, where we are providing free lawyers for families facing eviction in housing court. I mean, that's rolling out in year 2. We've seen 27% of a reduction in evictions in the city of New York. So there is a lot that's happening both from a policy and a budget perspective.
Let's slide the conversation from the Jerome Rezoning into this idea of right to counsel now.
Yes.
You were pleased and part of the effort to make it happen so that people would get the kind of legal support they need in some of these circumstances. The latest news coming from you and from what we're reading is that you want to expand the right to counsel now. So, well, apparently I hit the button.
Exciting.
So tell me where we're at and what it is you'd like to see.
Right. So right now, the right to counsel law is in year 2 of a 5-year phase-in. The city has invested about $93 million working with civil legal service providers on a number of contracts, providing legal assistance from beginning to the end of a process, of a case. We've also included residents of public housing, which is being phased in as we speak to make sure we deal with non-rental cases, like administrative cases that go to 250 Broadway are also included. But what we have recognized, and when I say we, my council colleague, Councilmember Mark Levine and I, and the Right to Counsel Coalition, organizations like Casa Bronx and Northwest that have really been in the trenches with right to counsel. What we recognize is the current law only provides families eligible at 200% of the federal poverty level. So like I said, a family making minimum wage going up to $15 an hour, 2-parent household, both working, they're not eligible for right to counsel.
You know, I have to interject. 200% of the federal poverty level, I mean, I don't have the number in front of me. That's got to be, what, $30,000?
It's very, very low.
$2,000.
Very low.
Still not really enough to run a household and a family in this day.
So right to counsel 2.0, right, we're taking it to the next chapter, would essentially change that threshold to 400% of the federal poverty level and really deal with a lot of the court issues we've been experiencing in terms of courtroom capacity, some of the spacing issues and privacy matters that clients have had with their attorneys. We've seen great success, but we still have a lot of challenges in some of our boroughs.
Chances of passing, you feel good about
Optimistic. It took us 3 years to get right to
come in
counsel,
with energy tonight.
and I have 3 years left to go.
All right. So, and the timing on it, wait and see.
We've introduced it a few months ago, and now we are waiting, you know, to get a hearing, hopefully early 2019. We're working with the administration, with HRA, Jordan Dressler, and Steve Banks.
You, like me and like a lot of people who stay in touch with issues in the Bronx, have said, gee whiz, it's a good idea to close Rikers Island. And then as they started rolling out and saying this is how we're going to do it, everybody was like, wait a minute, we don't really, and certainly in the Bronx, we don't want a jail here, we don't want a jail there. The one that is currently on the table, I guess it's ready to go in Mott Haven, is not your district. But there was dialogue about having one in your district closer to the courthouse. What are your thoughts about where the replacement jail for Rikers that will be in the Bronx is at?
Right, so I've been a part of these conversations when the mayor first announced, when Melissa Mark-Verita, the former speaker, talked about closing Rikers Island, and of course I support the concept, the idea. I think borough-based facilities can provide more of a close-knit family relationship with family members and their loved ones, closer proximity to the courts and the civic area in, 4 boroughs excluding Staten Island. And I just think the environment at Rikers Island is not conducive to the corrections officers, the detainees, the medical staff, the clinical staff. I mean, no one there, the civilians and uniforms members of service. So when we talked about the idea, the location of my district on 161st Street was never really the initial idea, but because Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan are near the courthouse within walking proximity, everyone thought that would be a viable idea. Now, while I am supportive of closing, Rikers Island, I certainly did not want to have a NIMBY approach, but I also recognize that the site in question was too close to a number of schools.
You're talking about the one in Mott Haven?
No, the one on 161st Street.
Oh, the one in your district
yes,
that was
the one
proposed.
the one in my district next to the Bronx Hall of Justice.
Right.
We have the Bronx Hall of Justice, we have criminal court, civil court, and family court all in a 1-block radius. The district attorney's office and borough hall.
So on that level, it would have been convenient if from
the
that
site worked.
perspective.
Correct. But as it turned out, the site was not feasible. The site was very small in terms of the configurations that the city needed to acquire minimum 1,500 detainees plus recreation and plus a number of space and, office space. So it didn't work. 2/3 of the site on 161st Street is owned by the state. And the family court annex, which they were going to take away, is currently used by the DA as well as NYPD.
So your conclusion was this didn't work. Diana Ayala, who is the council member of the district, is frankly one of the only elected officials who kind of was like, well,
tough.
it's okay. Do you feel bad about it moving to a neighborhood where the community really is up in arms about not having it?
Well,
in their
generally,
community?
any community would be upset. I mean, I understand. I've heard from many of the residents from Diego Beekman, from the local area, the homeowners around the area.
Plans, for that
they had
area.
plans, but I will say that site is much bigger, and there is a lot of opportunity to build more than just one building. There is an opportunity to achieve a community center and affordable housing for local residents. So there's a lot of opportunity.
In a deal or in an arrangement.
Absolutely. And what the ultimate arrangement will look like, I want people to understand that this is not just one building. It's going to be a 21st century facility that we've never seen before, but we have the opportunity to really stimulate how that development works if we're willing to acknowledge the numbers that we have on Rikers Island. The number of Bronx residents that come from my district, from my colleagues in the South Bronx, are tremendous. And at the end of the day, it's much more fair to the families of these detainees to make sure that they have a place in the Bronx where they are instead of Rikers Island.
Was the process appropriate? And certainly the borough president and many others, maybe you too, were kind of upset because it was like, okay, that's where it's going to be. Shouldn't we have a situation where kind of these things are gone through a logical process that includes people before something is announced?
Right. And I think that's a part of why people are so angry and really pissed off, because the process that the mayor and Mock J put forth was not respectful of the elected officials and the stakeholders, and really of a lot of the things that have happened in the Bronx. When you look at a lot of the social service programs, jail facilities, safe injection sites, detox facilities, we usually get them all in the South Bronx, and people are very tired of that. They want to see different amenities for a community that is growing and that has a lot of potential. I think the mayor's office, really missed the ball here in terms of their communication with the borough president and the other elected officials. And so a part of this process has been forced. It's been forced on us, and that's why many people are very upset.
Is there something that could be done, whether legislatively or otherwise, to ensure that that doesn't happen again? I'll give you an example in a different part of the Bronx, this idea of a road diet on Morris Park Avenue. The people over there, community board said we're not for it. The community, I think, essentially made it clear we don't like the idea. And the next thing you know, the DOT said, well, you know what, we're doing it anyway. Not the kind of thing that I know I've been sitting in this seat for a long time. We hear it all the time that people in the Bronx want to see. Is there something that could finally be done to say communities deserve input?
I believe so. And depending on the project, we could look at legislation that we could codify in local law that will really provide a mechanism where if it's the community boards, if it's civic associations and other stakeholders, where we actually have real power. A lot of the efforts that we have had have not been successful because the community boards and other organizations only have a recommendation. They don't have any input on really stopping a ULURP process and stopping a lot of these projects.
In your, I guess the first term, you were the chair of the Criminal Justice Committee. Public Safety. That's what I thought about it in terms of criminal justice. So let's talk about that briefly, and then we'll talk about your new chairmanship.
Oh, okay, sure.
Let's talk about Raise the Age, which was, I know something you were behind, and it passed through while you were the chair of that committee. Where are we at? Is it working out? Are you pleased? Do we need to raise the age higher than where we've had it? Talk a little bit about what that was and where it might go.
Right. Grateful to Speaker Carl Hastie and my colleagues in the state legislature for recognizing that New York and North Carolina were the only two states that continue to prosecute 16 and 17-year-olds as adults. Shameful. And now, thanks to Raise the Age legislation, the city of New York had to comply with the new law as of October 1st. So it's a 2-year phase in October 1st of 2018, beginning with 17-year-olds, and then October 1st, 2019, 16-year-olds. And the idea is to use borough-based facilities. We do have one in Crossroads, which is in the Bronx at 149th Street and 3rd Avenue. And this is the facility where young people are coming instead of going to Rikers Island. The idea behind this is to look at criminal justice from a different perspective. Alternatives. And so it's run by ACS. ACS is working with corrections, NDOE, NDYCD, and community stakeholders. It's never happened before. So at first, when Crossroads opened, there was a number of violent incidents which hit the media. Very upsetting to see correction officers injured, as well as the youth. But I think through the first series of weeks, we were able to realize some of the things that we attempted to do that didn't necessarily work out. And so now there have been measures put in place to provide greater protections for the youth and the staff, as well as corrections officers. So I would say, although correction officers are still upset that they have to be there, they're not going to be there permanently. The idea is to have youth development specialists that work for ACS replace correction officers at Crossroads.
At what point would we reevaluate and say, you know what, finally worked? Or are we waiting 6 months, a year, 2 years? I mean, how do you view the whole project? And by the way, my reason for asking that is so often we don't get that kind of perspective. They just put a program in place and then it's like, all right, let's see what happens.
Right. Well, I don't know specifically what the legislation says in terms of evaluation and how do you define that, the metrics and the measurements. But I would say typically a year makes sense to revisit and to determine what successful measures have been put in place while the youth are at this location, anywhere from 30 days to 60, possibly 90 days. There is an incredible amount of vocation, of literacy and education programs, not just recreation, but they are in school during the day as if they would be in school in any other setting. And so there are programs that are in place so that the idea is when these youth exit, they are supposed to be better than when they entered. That's the goal. That demonstrates that there has been success. And it's also to reduce recidivism, to make sure that young people are on a pathway of success and they don't return to the criminal justice system.
I will make a note in 12 months we will have you back and revisit and ask you.
Probably before then.
Well, we know we'll have you back before that. So the new committee that you're chair of is the capital budget. And, this gets into where are we spending our big dollars for big projects. I know you probably deal with things all over the city. Talk about some of the things that are coming down the pike for you in the Bronx that people would be interested in knowing about.
So I am proud this year when the new speaker, Corey Johnson, took over in January, I was named the chair of a new subcommittee on capital, which falls under the finance committee led by Danny Drum. And this is our effort under our new speaker to really look at the capital budget of the city of New York. Over a 10-year period, it's about $80 billion. And we're talking about anything from the construction of new schools, libraries, parks, playgrounds, public facilities. I mean, we're talking about everything. Every agency has a capital budget. So SCA builds schools. They have a 5-year capital plan. When you talk about parks and comfort stations and renovations. So every agency has a capital budget. And what we're doing under this new subcommittee is we're trying to expedite the process, increase efficiency to make sure that agencies are drawing down on money that's allocated, but also we're making sure that things are done in a timely fashion.
So that if the money is allocated,
Absolutely.
something actually gets done.
Correct.
I want to, before we run out of time, talk a little bit about NYCHA. Speaking of money well spent. Or
Can't leave without talking about NYCHA.
Or not well spent. I've talked to many elected officials in the Bronx about this. You just don't know where to begin. I read that for the first time they were talking about splitting up NYCHA to, have a Brooklyn branch, a Queens branch, a Bronx branch, et cetera. Seems to me that should have been done just years ago. How did we never thought to, kind of really manage this thing? What do you want to say about it? I mean, there's just so much to talk about, whether it's lead paint, whether it's no gas, no heat, no water, bad management. I mean, we just go on. What are your thoughts?
So I guess the first thing I always have to do is really apologize to residents of public housing because they deserve so much better. And I truly believe if the residents of public housing did not look the way they did, the response will be much better.
Look, meaning?
Meaning in terms of race, in terms of socioeconomic status. Many of the families in NYCHA are working and they're working class, but they simply don't have anywhere to go. They have lived in NYCHA all their lives, raised their families, and they deserve better. This administration, I give credit, has invested an unprecedented amount of money for roofs and boilers and lights and cameras and everything you can think of. But when you get down to the development, they're not spending the money as they should. And we have had too many press conferences, too many hearings, too many lawsuits where the federal government has to come in and tell us what to do, whether it's lead-based paint, whether it's the heat and hot water issues, elevators. I represent 10 developments.
Wow.
And it's a lot of need that goes around.
Where an answer would be, yes, give me $35 billion, we'll correct the whole thing.
Yep, that's the amount.
That's not happening. What is an answer that would make NYCHA residents say, well, okay, we're doing better? I know there was kind of a mini plan recently to
the
fix
mayor
some
announced, yes.
quick things. There's some question about whether that's gone well.
Right.
But how do you see ultimately correcting it? Is it administrative to start, managerial?
Administrative and managerial, obviously, yes. I've been looking from the subcommittee perspective at their capital division and how we're hiring the architects and engineers to get these projects up and running so that they can draw down on money that's already been allocated. But I also will say the mayor just made an announcement, and of that $35 billion you described, that's the physical needs assessment that was recently done to determine how much we need to fix the entire NYCHA. Of that $35 billion, the mayor's plan through the RAD program, the Rental Assistance Demonstration Project, which is a public-private partnership, would get us $12 billion of that 35. So it's a start.
It's a start.
It's a start.
Yeah, we're essentially out of time. Again, the money sounds nice, but it's got to be managed properly. It's got to be spent right.
And residents have to feel it, tangible.
Yes.
It's the heating season. People have no heat.
Goodness gracious. And the story that came out of the Patterson houses with no water was just horrific.
Over a weekend.
Council member, your enthusiasm is infectious. We wish you good luck. We wish you happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
You know we'll invite you back in 2019.
Yes.
All right. Folks, we always ask people to comment on what we've done in our programs. And so last week we did a show on the term limits for community boards. I don't know if the council member likes the idea or not, but that's another thing. So Sharon B. from Facebook wrote, I voted in favor of the proposal. The problem is trying to get on a board should not be so difficult. And yes, there should be more publicity for when and what these boards are doing so more people can come forward and participate in their communities. Nice words from Sharon B. Via Facebook. We appreciate that. Now, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, send us an email at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org. You can send a tweet at BronxTalk, or as Sharon did, post them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air. Next week, a fun show. Stephen Ritz, a Bronx educator who has become a national figure. On the 24th, we'll highlight the year of Bronx Talk. Some great programs. And you'll see highlights of all those. On New Year's Eve, we'll do our annual show with Wandering New York. Joe Raskin, one of our favorite Bronx photographers who shoots incredible landscapes and architecture in the Bronx, will be our guest. We'll show nice pictures to launch us into the new year. We thank our producer-directors tonight, William Guzman and Nicholas Marrero. We thank the council member for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Good night. Happy holidays.
Thank you.